Ever look in the mirror and see your mom's eyes? Or maybe you've got your dad's smile. Well, it all comes down to this incredible invisible code, the code of heredity. And today, we're going to crack that code. We're going to dive deep into the story of genetics.
Yeah, it really all starts with these super simple questions, right? Questions we all have. Why does an elephant always have a baby elephant and not, a giraffe? Why does a mango seed always grow into a mango tree? It seems so obvious, but trust me, the science behind it, it's this incredible story of discovery.
There's a scientific name for this, of course. It's called inheritance. And this process, this passing down of traits, is the absolute foundation of heredity. Figuring out how it all works, well, that's been a massive puzzle for humanity for thousands and thousands of years.
All right, so let's jump in our time machine and see how this giant puzzle was finally pieced together. Because for most of human history, the how of it all was a total mystery. And what's wild is that we were already using it to our advantage, even without understanding it.
I mean, think about it. All the way back to 8000 BC, we were already playing with genetics. We just didn't know it. We were selectively breeding plants and animals to get the traits we wanted. Think about creating awesome domesticated cows like the Sahiwal cows in Punjab. We knew that it worked, but the why? Total black box. The science was a complete mystery until, you guessed it, the mid-1800s, when this one Austrian monk, Gregor Mendel, started looking for clues. In his garden, of all places.
So the big question is, how did this one guy, this monk in a garden, succeed where literally everyone else had failed? Well, his whole approach was just radically different. He picked a super simple subject, the humble garden pea plant, and brought a completely new way of thinking to crack the code. And this was the key. This was his secret weapon. See, before Mendel, biology was mostly about just looking at stuff and describing it. He was the first person to bring math, actual numbers, statistical analysis, and logic into biology. It was a game changer. That rigor, plus the fact he used massive sample sizes, is what made his discoveries so powerful and so undeniable. Okay, so his method was incredibly meticulous. He started with what are called true breeding pea plants. Basically, these are plants that if you let them self-pollinate, they'll always produce kids identical to themselves. A tall plant makes more tall plants, period. He picked 7 really clear contrasting traits, like plant height, which was either tall or dwarf, no in between. Then he very carefully cross-pollinated these parents, watched their kids, the F1 generation, and then he let those kids self-pollinate to see what would happen to the grandkids, the F2 generation. Super systematic. And this is where things get really interesting. When he crossed a pure-breeding tall plant with a pure-breeding dwarf plant, what do you think happened? All of the offspring, every single one in that first generation, was tall. The dwarf trait, it just vanished. It was like it had been completely wiped out. No medium-sized plants, no blending, nothing, just tall. So that result obviously begs the next big question, right? Was that dwarf trait gone forever, or was it just lurking somewhere, hiding in the background? Mendel had to know. So he took those new tall plants and let them self-pollinate to see what would pop out. And the result? It was absolutely mind-blowing. The dwarf trait, it came back. It reappeared out of nowhere. And here's the kicker. It wasn't random. Not at all. For every 3 tall plants, there was 1 dwarf plant. A perfect, predictable 3-to-1 ratio. This wasn't just biology anymore. This was math. This was the code he was looking for. You see, that simple number, that 3-to-1 ratio, was the key. It was the key that unlocked the entire mystery. It gave Mendel the evidence he needed to propose a set of rules, actual laws, that govern how all these traits get passed down. Okay, so based on that simple ratio, Mendel made this absolutely brilliant leap of logic. He figured that traits must be controlled by these little discrete units he called factors. Today we call them genes. And he realized that every plant has to have 2 factors for each trait. Now, if the factors are different, say 1 for tall and 1 for dwarf, one of them, the dominant one, completely masks the other, the recessive one. And bam! That perfectly explained why all those first-generation plants were tall and why the dwarf trait could suddenly reappear a generation later. There's actually a cool little tool that lets us see this in action. It's called a Punnett square. It's basically a simple grid that shows you all the possible combinations of factors the kids can get from their parents. And when you map out that second cross, the math lines up perfectly. You end up with one plant with 2 tall factors, 2 with a mix of tall and dwarf, and 1 with 2 dwarf factors. But since tall is dominant, what you actually see, the phenotype, is 3 tall plants for every 1 dwarf. It's so elegant.
So, from all this careful work, he cooked up his first 2 major laws. First, the law of dominance. That's the one we've been talking about, where one trait can hide another. And second, the law of segregation. This one's super important. It just says that the 2 factors an organism has for a trait get separated when it makes its sex cells. So each parent only passes down one of its 2 factors, chosen at random, to its kid.
But, of course, biology is never that simple, is it? As other scientists started digging into Mendel's work, they found some really fascinating situations where the rules, well, they seem to bend a little bit. And this added all these amazing new layers to the story.
Okay, for example, take the snapdragon flower. Now, with Mendel's peas, tall, beat dwarf. End of story. But with snapdragons, if you cross a pure red one with a pure white one, you don't get red flowers, you get pink. How cool is that? This is called incomplete dominance. Basically, the red gene isn't strong enough to completely overpower the white one, so you get this beautiful blended pink color in the hybrid.
Yeah, it's just a perfect real-world example. The offspring that has one of each allele, the technical term is heterozygote, ends up with a phenotype that's this gorgeous mix of its parents. This was one of the first big clues for scientists that Mendel's rules were an incredible foundation, but there were some really neat exceptions to discover. And then you've got something called codominance, and for a great example, we just have to look at our own bodies, specifically our blood types. See, the genes for A-type blood and B-type blood are basically equally powerful. So if you inherit one of each from your parents, they don't blend. Instead, they both show up, fully expressed. That's how you get AB blood type. They're not blending, they're coexisting. But even with all this figured out, there was still this one giant, gaping hole in the puzzle. Mendel had the rules, right? He had the math, but he had no clue what his factors actually were physically. What were these things made of? He had the how, but not the what. And here's the kind of sad part of the story. Mendel published his incredible work way back in 1865, and crickets, nothing happened. It was almost completely ignored for 35 years. His ideas were just too far ahead of their time, too mathematical for the biologists of that era. He actually died without ever knowing the revolutionary impact his work would have.
But fast forward to 1900 and the world was finally ready to catch up. Microscopes had gotten way better, and scientists like Walter Sutton and Theodore Boveri were peering into cells, watching them divide. And they noticed these little thread-like structures in the nucleus. They called them chromosomes, and these things were doing a very specific dance of doubling and dividing.
And then they had this aha moment. What they realized was just extraordinary. The way these chromosomes were behaving during cell division, it perfectly matched the behavior of Mendel's abstract factors. Chromosomes came in pairs. Mendel said factors came in pairs. Chromosomes separated during sex cell formation. Mendel said factors segregated. The parallels were just uncanny. It was a perfect match.
And that was it. That discovery connected everything. Mendel's abstract factors finally had a physical address. They were genes, and they lived on the chromosomes, right there inside the nucleus of our cells. The chromosomal theory of inheritance was born, and it finally gave the long-forgotten monk the credit he deserved.
So just think about that for a second. The entire massive field of modern genetics, it all started with one person getting curious about some pea plants in a quiet monastery garden. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What simple everyday puzzles are all around us right now, just waiting for someone to look closer and maybe unlock the next huge scientific